symbolic of Jesus' life and death.
Obviously, the most important thing on the Shroud of Turin is the image of a man, front and back, ventral and dorsal, that appears along the full length of the cloth with the ventral and dorsal images head to head with an appropriate space between them for the cloth to have been wrapped the way it was. Of course, the most important thing that we see, if we look at the ventral image, front image, is the man himself. And as he stands there, you can see his arms crossed before him. You can see his shoulders, although they were damaged in the fire of 1532 and there are holes and patches there now. You can then look down the body, see the crossed hands. You can then see the legs, the knees, the thighs, the calves, and even the feet on the ventral image. Now, when you look at the shroud a little closer, you'll also see a number of stains, the most important of which, if you look directly near his heart, is the darkest blood stain, which we call the spear wound blood stain that appears on the shroud. And interestingly enough, although you can't see it with the naked eye, when you photograph this area with UV fluorescence photography, you see a large serum stain, invisible to normal lighting, but visible there on the shroud with UV fluorescence photography. Now, as you come down the shroud and look again at the hands, you'll see blood stains near the wrists of the man of the shroud. Now, this would be the crucifixion wound from where the hands were nailed to the cross, and unlike all medieval and Renaissance art, which always depicts the nailing of the hands through the palms themselves, this shows an exit wound further up the wrist and would have been the correct exit wound for the nailing through the wrists, because the Romans did this all the time and they knew very well where to nail the hands so they wouldn't come loose, and in the middle of the palm is not the place to do that, closer to the wrist. So unlike all medieval and Renaissance art, the shroud shows it forensically accurate in the wrist. Now, if you come down and look at the feet, you'll also see at the feet blood stains. Now, there's some argument as to whether both feet were individually nailed or whether one foot was nailed over the other. We cannot tell this from the blood stains on the shroud. So it is impossible for us to make that conclusion, draw that conclusion from the Shroud of Turin. Now, when you look at the back side of the man, the dorsal side of the man, there you see something really amazing. There are a lot of markings across the back. Now, if you look closely, you'll find these extend all the way down past the buttocks to the back of the legs. And even on the front or ventral view, you'll find many of these, because these are dumbbell-shaped markings, scourge wounds from a Roman flagrum. And a Roman flagrum had 3 thongs, leather usually, and at the end of each, a dumbbell-shaped lead or bone weight. And these are the marks that we see on the Shroud of Turin. We see dumbbell-shaped bruises, many of them that drew blood, actually broke the skin, and these cover the man's body, not just the back where they're predominant, but also many came around the front, because as the scourger moved a little closer, his whip would then wrap around the front of the body and leave markings on the front of the body as well. Now, if we look at the face of the man of the shroud, we see blood stains on the forehead. And if we go further, we see blood stains in the hair. And if you look at the dorsal or back view of the head that shows the back of the head, you see many blood stains there as well. We have stains on the shroud, on the head, as if from a cap or crown of thorns. So once again, everything about the Shroud of Turin, all of the blood stains, all of these markings are accurate to the gospel account of what was done to Jesus when he was scourged, beaten. And if you look at the man's face, once again, I should mention, if you look at the face, look at the bruised cheekbones, one more swollen than the other, but both rather swollen. So this man had been beaten in the face, he had been scourged, he had been then crucified, and then he was speared in the side. And what we have here is an accurate depiction, forensically accurate, of a crucified man, exactly as the gospel accounts of Jesus.
And it conforms exactly to the shape and length of the burial space in the tomb in the garden.
Well, the question about the garden tomb is an interesting one. First thing I have to honestly admit is that I've not ever really done a true study of the garden tomb myself, only the shroud. But understanding that the height of the man in the carved garden tomb is 5'11", is certainly coincidental with what I have always perceived as the average height of the man of the shroud, which I've always put at about 5'11". Now, let me amplify that a little by saying that, remember, first of all, the Shroud of Turin is not a stable substrate. In other words, it can be stretched, it can be moved, and as a matter of fact, through the centuries, the Shroud of Turin has actually been displayed hung from balconies at one end with weights on the other end to keep it from flapping in the wind. So obviously, a certain amount of stretching is inevitable with the Shroud of Turin, particularly on the long dimension, because that's the way it was often displayed. Now, the other thing one has to consider is this is a linen, finely woven linen cloth, and it can change its length by as much as 1 centimeter or more, based solely on the humidity in which the shroud itself is kept. So there are many variables, and there's great debate about exactly how tall the man on the shroud is. Some people have said 6 feet, some people have said 6 feet 1. But again, remembering the stretching capability, and of course the recent 2002 restoration where they smoothed out all the wrinkles and resewed the cloth onto a different backing cloth, the shroud grew by another 8 centimeters, so that too would have impacted the dimensions of the man on the shroud if they were to be measured. So the best studies and the average of all of the arguments, if you will, as to how tall the man on the shroud is, sort of averages out to about 5'11", which is what I then typically use as my answer to the question, how tall is the man on the shroud? Remember, I came to that conclusion long before I knew about the Garden Tomb. So, is this a coincidence? Well, if the Garden Tomb is the authentic tomb in which Jesus was buried, and if the Shroud of Turin is the authentic cloth that wrapped his body, then it would go to, one could easily conclude then that it makes sense that they would both be the same height. As I said, I've never made the study of the Garden Tomb, although I might not want to put it aside, might want to go do a little more research now myself, just because I find this is a fascinating coincidence.
To the team, this was both the proof they were seeking and the final stage of their quest. It was also the beginning of another, this time, the Shroud of Turin.
Suddenly, Jesus met them.
"Greetings,"
he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them,
"Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me."
Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said,
"All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.